You're listening to Consulting Logistics, presented by FreightPlus. I'm your host, Kyle McNaught, and we are in a new studio. If you check us out on Instagram, you see that FreightPlus is doing some big moves, big things. We got a fun new office in a new area, and I get to do the first podcast in our new studio with my man, Chris Peckham. I'm so excited about this because we got to talk about the May market report. It's out right now. If you go to freightplus.io/May-market-report, you can download it. Awesome report, not filled with like numbers to get you sideways. It's more of data and evidence and kind of anecdotal stuff that I love because it really is helping learn what's happening in the industry. So if you watched our last podcast, you saw Chris Gula talk about LTL and stuff. So I had to bring the other Chris Peckham on, help talk about exactly what happened in May. So Chris, how's it going?
It's going good. Good.
We're not as stuffed as we used to be. There's not a line of dudes waiting to go to the bathroom behind us as we record. So
exactly.
Things are nice, a little insider stuff. I mean, it's a fun little background. We actually got some stuff. But yeah, this is even the temporary one. We're going to go into the real studio space eventually. But let's talk a little bit about the May market report. What happened in May?
Yeah, well, from a truckload standpoint, what we saw in May was eerily similar to what we saw in April, right? So we saw volumes remain very elevated. The volume index, for all intents and purposes, remained above 14,000. We did see a dip towards the end of the month, which is completely expected with the Memorial Day holiday. So we actually saw a one-day drop of about 2,500 points, which we haven't seen in a while. But again, that's right behind the holiday. And just based on yesterday's data, we just saw an increase in the volume index come back up 2,500. So we're back above 14,000. The rejection index remained between the 23 and 25%. So it's funny when I read about, the rejection index is trending down. It's like, yeah, it went from 24.8 to 23.9. That still means that 1 out of every 4 trucks is being rejected by a primary carrier. So to me, it's not really good news.
It's not something you react on, right? It's the cool. That's a number. Like does this, but that's like fake stats. Like still 1 out of every 4 trucks is being rejected.
Doesn't move the needle. When it gets below 20, let's have a conversation because that to me is material. Moving a percentage point up or down is not material to me.
Right. So I mean, the truckload performed kind of as is. Let's talk. I mean, especially let's be proactive with this. And we're heading into the summer months. I mean, Massachusetts right now, we're in a massive heat wave. So it's all fun for everyone. Florida boy loves it. But all the mass guys are not too excited. Summer, it's already being predicted as kind of, was it 1 million Americans? I forgot what the stat is. More than 1 million Americans have passed through the U.S. airports alone since early March. We're opening back up, but we're not opening up internationally.
Right.
It's kind of going to be more of a domestic kind of travel. What can we kind of expect to see as more families, more drivers hit the road? How will that affect the truckload mode?
Well, the big impact is going to be around fuel, which I know we're going to talk about later. Fuel always goes up in the summer for this exact reason. You got more people on the road, more people traveling. To your exact point, domestic travel is definitely, skyrocketing, getting back to pre-pandemic levels. But internationally, it hasn't opened up. And that actually still impacts, that continues to impact our international air freight, right? And we don't spend a lot of time talking about international air freight, but we need those passenger jets on the international side because half of all air freight cargo flies in the belly of a passenger aircraft. So I was just looking at some average cost per kilos coming from Asia to North America, and they're still, just under $9 per kilo, which in normal times, go back pre-pandemic, that's in the $350 range. So it's still super high. So yeah, travel's opening up. That means that we're going to pay a little bit more at the pump. From a truckload standpoint, we don't see any slowing in terms of orders. We're still in produce season, although it's starting to wrap up. But volumes everywhere are still elevated.
What about with the ELD, the electronic logging device? So I was actually watching a YouTube video where a trucker was talking about it, and she's like, I hate it. And they all say they hate it. And you even in the report talk about how the length of hauls, sort of that tweener lanes kind of becoming the persona non grata of what people want to travel. How does this increased traffic affect that? Or is there any kind of plan or anything that we're kind of expecting to happen?
Yeah, it's a really good point. So, you think, and let's just think it through sequentially, there's more traffic, right? So you got more cars on the road. You've got a truckload market that's absolutely at capacity. Mm-hmm. And then you have these receivers that have these, in some cases, unrealistic delivery windows, right? So we have we have a customer who has a receiver who has a 15-minute delivery window, right? Absolutely incredible that somebody thinks in today's day and age that that's going to be able to get hit, knowing full well what's going on in the marketplace. So, you can see a lot of challenging conversations between ourselves and receivers, shippers and receivers, customers and their customers and all that stuff. So it's going to be, and unfortunately, to your point, and trying to be proactive and get out in front of it, unfortunately, I know that I've said this month on month, that I think there's going to be a shift from goods to services and we'll see some relief in 2021. I'm not 100% saying that it's not going to happen.
Oh, come on. Don't go away from it.
I'm really, it's not looking good.
6 months of you saying it's happening. It's happening. We can't go away.
I know, but I got to hold myself accountable. Right? I mean, I got to be fair. I've been saying it, and it's still, we still have a little bit of time.
Right.
But the more research I do, the more people I talk to, people are really starting to dig in and be very bullish that this is going to last through 2021. Yeah. No bueno.
How about just finally in truckload, reefer, flatbed, kind of anything? I know especially flatbed's interesting because the capacity crunch. I mean, how much of this is due to manufacturing? How much of like the capacity crunch is seasonal?
So, flatbed gets impacted by a whole bunch of different industries, housing being one of them too. So we've seen flatbed rejections and capacity sort of drop down, but not in a completely material way. New housing starts, which is a key data point that we look at. Those continue to be rising. If any of you folks out there have been in the market for a new house, what pricing looks like. It is not pretty, no matter where you are. I mean, especially here in Massachusetts, it's been absolutely insane. So I just saw another uptick in the beginning of June for both flatbed and reefer. Reefer kind of following the same story, kind of trailed off a little bit towards the end of the month, but it came snapping right back in the beginning of June. We're still in produce season, although that's starting to wind up. But now you're going into harvest season, for things like almonds, walnuts, all that stuff as well. So reefers are going to continue to stay elevated through the summer months as they typically do.
Yeah, that's truckload's going to be interesting. And like I said a little bit earlier in the episode, we did do an episode before this with Chris Gula all about LTL. So again, a good episode to go watch if you really want to get behind kind of what is really those macro issues happening in LTL. But quickly, tell me what happened in the less than truckload mode for the month of May.
Yeah, LTL's struggled, as most modes have. There's driver shortages. I mean, there are some initiatives to attract new drivers, whether it's, people who are at least 21 years of age and having them be able to drive interstate. There's some marketing towards attracting women drivers into the industry, but overall, the industry is suffering. Everybody is still operating at full capacity. Carriers are not taking on, some carriers are refusing to take on new business. So it's kind of the same that we saw in the month of April.
Right. Anything like if you're watching like a shipper, like are you hearing anything that like, hey, rejection index isn't really going down? Is there anything that they should pay attention to or just kind of?
Yeah, no, I mean, overall from the truckload standpoint, that rejection index isn't going anywhere anytime soon.
All right, cool. Intermodal. You did do a video most recently. If people haven't watched it, explains how intermodal works. A great video. It's on our YouTube channel to watch. But how did intermodal perform in the month of May?
Yeah, intermodal still remains a decent alternative to truckload, but it really is going to be dependent on the lane. So we did see some surcharges that were reintroduced by a couple of the Class 1 railroads. Those still exist, although I can say in the past 2 weeks, I have had some success securing capacity at competitive rates that are better than the OTR rates. But again, it's kind of in pockets, right? So, we have the whole acquisition that we talked about 2 months ago, right, where the Canadian Pacific was going to acquire the Kansas City Southern. Well, now it's actually the Canadian National that made a better bid, and they're going to end up acquiring the Kansas City Southern pending regulatory approval. So a little bit of a shift in dynamic. But again, we don't expect from a shipper standpoint any material changes. So what it's going to do, though, is it's going to give the Canadian National a true,
North American
network to offer to their customers. So
how this is top of mind, but like I was on a call recently, and I kind of referred to this a little bit later in the episode, but they were talking a little bit about intermodal and the whole, like, and you said in the video, intermodal is multimodal, right?
Right.
So it's not only just rail, but it's also truckload. How much chaos or how much impact does kind of all those things we talk about with truckload and LTL impact that kind of intermodal, multimodal thing? Or is this kind of it's just
Sure.
the usual?
No, it does impact it. So there are, we have a scarcity of drivers. We know that. We know how many drivers need to be added over the next 10 years to support the anticipated demand. But these local drivers, these draymen, who are just going to be moving containers from the rail to the final destination, which should be within 100 miles, let's say. So, we'll call it a local run. We have a driver shortage. So all of this stuff being at full capacity just means that there's less people to take those loads. So what the rail has done is now they're penalizing boxes that are sitting in the yard because it creates congestion. Right. So as a rail operator, just like a marine terminal, I've got to take boxes off the rail, and if the truck is not there, I got to put them on the ground. Right. And now I got to put another one on the ground. And now I got to go pick up that same box when the truck is finally available and put it on a chassis and give it to that driver. So I got to touch it twice. So my productivity is not good, and we see it's the exact same operation as you would see in a marine terminal. The less touches, the better. The more you have to ground containers like that, it's just bad news for everybody.
Jeez. All right. So you bring up Ocean. Talk to me. How did Ocean perform in May?
Yeah, Ocean continues to struggle. And unfortunately, this is going to be a recurring theme throughout the balance of the year. So right now, globally, about half of the containers are getting rolled at every major port. What that means is I was scheduled to be on a vessel departing today, and now there's no space, so I'm getting rolled to the next vessel, which could be a week later. So that's a horrible statistic right there. If we focus on the TPE, the Trans-Pacific Eastbound, so coming into North America, costs are just absolutely through the roof. If we go in the Wayback Machine pre-COVID, the bigger importers out there, the Targets, the Walmarts, the Phillips, the Depots, those guys, and I don't have access to their contracts, so I'm speculating, but I know enough to be dangerous here, where they're probably paying about $1,000 for a 40-foot container from China to the West Coast. Coming out of contract season, I have no idea what they're paying, but I can tell you in the spot market right now, I just hit my desk today, I know of a shipper that had to pay $12,000 to move a container from China to the West Coast. Now, I was seeing that from base ports in China to the East Coast on all water services, and I actually just heard of another quote today coming out of Thailand, going to New York for over $17,000. So it's all supply and demand. Production continues overseas. There's no let up in sight. We're breaking records now for the amount of TEUs that are being handled at all ports in the U.S. And again, there's no real end in sight here. And to compound things, we've had a couple of incidences, some noteworthy news overseas. In Yantian, well, I think it's the fourth biggest port in China in terms of throughput. Huge COVID outbreak. Now we have less workers available to handle containers. Now steamship lines are skipping that port of call, and they're just bypassing it. Right. That doesn't mean that production doesn't continue and containers for export don't continue to pile up, but they're just skipping it because they know that they're going to get anchored. It's going to be a huge delay. So they're saying on to the next port we go. So most major carriers are doing that. That impacts other ports like Shekou, and carriers are looking at other ports like shipping out of Hong Kong instead, or Nansha. But if your production is in China and you want to ship to Hong Kong, there are other nuances there. It's got to clear customs in China, then it's got to clear customs in Hong Kong. There's all sorts of regulatory stuff in the origin side that makes it tricky. So that's a huge impact. We had a vessel collision in Kaohsiung, knocked over a couple cranes. Thankfully, nobody was killed. I think one worker was hurt, but that's also slowing down. Obviously they have to stop, make repairs. That's also impacting everything. So you take all of this plus inflated demand, and what it does is it tells me that these astronomical pricing that we've never seen in the history of the maritime industry has a potential to go even higher, which is crazy to me.
How? What? All right. What are they doing to try to combat this? Like, we talked to Gula, and he's talking about the ways that like LTL is trying to handle the driver shortage, but like that compared to this seems like playing tic-tac-toe compared to like playing one of those insane games. Like how are they trying? How's Ocean trying to figure this out?
It's difficult because if you place an order for a new vessel today and the overall order book is up significantly, place it today. Happy birthday in 3 years. That vessel will be ready to rock and roll.
Right.
So it's not something where you can just go out and say, okay, we're going to build some new stuff. We're going to introduce new capacity and we're going to help solve the problem. We would have had to have done this 3 years ago, but who would have seen this 3 years ago, a couple of years ago? How long it takes to build a vessel depends on the vessel size itself.
Right.
So that's one thing that they're trying to do. But if you look at the idle fleet right now, it's like 2% of the total fleet is idle. And that's an all-time low. So it's not like they have ships parked somewhere where they can just say, okay, time to come back into the rotation. There's nothing out there. So yes, the order book is up. New vessels will be introduced. But I caution against that being some sort of panacea for everybody, because these steamship lines have become very good about controlling supply and making sure that it's always in line with demand. Now, these costs have to go away. These are not sustainable. You will see companies go out of business if they have to pay $12,000 to get a container from China to the West Coast, specifically for somebody who's selling product at a super low price. Right? You can't take a margin hit like that. If you're selling something that is going to hit retail at $200, you've got enough wiggle room. You won't like the dent to your margin, but you'll survive.
Right.
But some of these other smaller players, they quite frankly going to get put out of business.
Jeez. So I'm still shook from the ocean stuff, but let's go over into indicators. I mean, let's try to find some stuff. Fuel. Let's talk about what we're seeing in the fuel.
Yep. So the national on-highway price of diesel went up again. So the EIA releases it every late Monday afternoons. It's actually up to $3.27. And now that's back up 6 weeks in a row after coming back down. Again, we're getting into the summer months. There's just more consumption out there, whether it's the domestic airline stuff, the domestic travel, more people just back on the road. I mean, I can tell you from my commute here, it looks materially different than what it did just a couple months ago. So yeah, we expect it always climbs during the summer. I would expect that to continue to rise a bit. We're back in 2019 levels on what it looks like month on month and monthly averages and stuff. So I would expect that to continue to rise and hopefully plateau as more refineries come back on board. They're able to just increase their output, and hopefully that will start to come down as we get later into the summer.
Now, I don't want to make you be like gas Nostradamus, but do we think we're going to see kind of that 2000 level anytime, or is it like we're kind of more or less where we should be right now?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely higher than where we should be.
Okay.
But I was just reading about some crude oil outputs, and the on-hand inventories are expected to fall by, I think it was 1.6 barrels per day, which is pretty significant. And OPEC has actually increased production as well. So that just tells you that consumption is significantly elevated. So again, that just at the end of the day, after a whole bunch of different points along the chain, that results in higher prices at the pump for you and I.
What about that hack? Like, it's not hilarious, but we literally recorded the April one of these, and like that week, I'm like, of course, there's a freaking pipeline hack and gas shortages.
Yeah, why wouldn't that be?
Is there any fallout from the hack that we kind of will see, sort of like a Suez Canal issue, or is this something that, like, hey, people get a little crazy for about 10 days and they're cleared up?
Yeah, it's back up and running. And again, there was, gasoline became the new toilet paper. People were out just panic buying, right, filling up when they didn't really need to. Bringing in the extra cans to have at the house. So a little bit of panic buying, definitely shut down some stations who were out of fuel, but we're back up to quote normal.
Right.
And as you and I were talking about before this, the government was able to recover a little over $2 million in that overall hack. But, and everybody's reading in the news, this is not the last time you're going to hear about, cyber attacks, whether it's in the fuel industry, the meat industry has gone through the exact same thing. This is going to continue. I mean, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I think, again, back to reference that call, like on Fridays, I'm part of like a kind of more or less shipper kind of carrier call thing. And they were talking about, they're like, we bet on what we think is going to be the next thing. And I'm like, it's going to be whatever they can.
Yeah.
Like whatever is vulnerable, they're going after. So it's not like there was a whole conspiracy theory about trying to weed us off of gas and meat. And that was why like these things randomly got hacked. I'm like, no, they're just going for what's vulnerable. Like that's about it.
Yep.
PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index. What do we see in May? More or less the same?
Yeah. So April was positive. It was above 60. At the time of the report, we didn't have the May results. but the May results are in, and I think it came in at 62 point something. So again, still trending in a very positive direction. Anything above 50 indicates that expansionary economy. And here's why we don't think it's going to slow down. There's two huge obstacles when it comes to manufacturing, and one is labor. So we still see labor, the labor force hasn't fully returned due to COVID restrictions and people just naturally not coming back to the workforce. And the other one are inputs, right? So you need the inputs to make the output which is going to be the finished product. Mm-hmm. And a really good example that we can all relate to is the auto industry. So right now, I think everybody is probably aware that we have a global shortage of microchips, right? Microchips are used. This shortage will impact over 150 different industries. But if we focus on the auto, having these microchips is necessary for all the technology that we have in our cars today. Right. So that just means that there are going to be less new cars on the lot, right? So natural supply and demand, Adam Smith economics here. You have less supply, but you have pent up demand, right? So we've seen people that want to now, we've seen a re-engaging in the auto industry and wanting to buy a new car coming out of COVID. Prices are just naturally going to go up. The residual impact is that if you wanted to buy a used car, those prices are going to go up. So I was reading some analytics about just days of on-hand inventory, and a typical car dealership will have about 40 days of inventory on hand at any given time. Right. This one dealership, and it's a pretty big conglomerate here in New England, says that right now he's averaging about 10 or 12. He said that in his 40 years in the industry, he's never seen this type of sort of black swan event, if you will. So if you're in the market for a car, I'm sorry. So just be ready to have a little bit of sticker shock. And literally it's really snapped in just the past month since that microchip shortage was what has been acknowledged, I guess, for lack of a better term.
So is that, I mean, the microchip, we can go down a whole rabbit hole with that. I just wonder, I know you mentioned also like the workforce and that type of thing. Do we, like we're seeing it everywhere, right? It's not, the driver shortage is one way because that's a whole different ball game of what you need to do. But are we seeing anything, or is there anything that's kind of helping with the worker shortage, or like what are we anticipating? Because I know they're mentioning too, like, hey, the gig economy, the idea that you can just drive Uber and like you're not working a 9 to 5 is something that's more enticing to the younger generations and to those ones who used to do this type of work, especially kind of that backbreaking stuff that you need to be able to kind of be young and recover from. Yeah. Is there any kind of worry about that type of stuff happening?
Well, I think one of the things that was sort of affording people to stay home was around these different stimulus checks, right? And now that those are coming to an end, you should hopefully see more folks return to the workforce. So some of the jobs reports that we track have been trending positive, not where they need to be. So unemployment still remains, pretty high. But I think now that we're seeing some of that government stimulus come to an end, you'll see more of a return to the workforce, hopefully. Yeah. It's just a good thing for us because, now inflation becomes a question, with all these prices starting to rise up due to all these other contributing elements, so to speak. That becomes a concern. So we need folks to get back into we need the folks that are able to work to get back into the workforce.
All right. I want to wrap it. I know that there's plenty of things that we eventually got to talk about, right? We got to talk about parcel. We should talk about air freight. I mean, final mile is another thing, and the expected returns, so all that fun stuff. But I want to hit him with another pessimistic thing that you might not be thinking about, which is the longshoreman. Yep. Talk to me about this. This is a really cool thing you put in the report at the end of it. This is being super proactive. So kind of give me the breakdown as the dumb idiot that I am.
So in the maritime industry, you have two main unions that operate, that are responsible for, the folks that are working the docks, working the ship-to-shore cranes, working the RTG cranes. And that's the ILWU, which represents all the West Coast ports, and the ILA, which represents all the East Coast and Gulf Coast ports. Now, typically these contracts are staggered, meaning they don't expire at the same time. However, due to some extensions that happened after the last negotiation, these are both now due to expire on July 1st, 2022. Now, a little bit of historical context. The ILA negotiations have typically been a lot more amicable. And they currently operate in a hybrid type of environment, meaning that non-union employees can perform union jobs. to a degree. And I can't list them all out,
Right,
but
right.
that's just the way that contract is written. Usually much less contentious. On the West Coast, those have typically always been a lot more contentious.
Okay.
And they're really around two things. They're around labor and automation and technology. So meaning that the union tends to be anti-technology, anti-automation, because that would result in less jobs, right? So this year, they're both going to expire at the exact same time. Now, why I bring up that historical context is that the ILA has recently filed a lawsuit against the port in South Carolina. It's a brand new terminal, and they're saying that there was non-union labor performing union jobs, even though they're already working in a hybrid contract. So that tells me right now they're filing a lawsuit against management on the East Coast. That tells me that they're going to be hyper focused on labor, and they're also saying, hey, however nice we used to be, just buckle up, because we're going to dig in here. And that, I think that labor point in that contract is going to be a specific focus. The West Coast, I expect them to march on as is. It's going to be around automation and technology. But the fact that both of them are due to expire at the same time could mean that this thing could get really, really ugly. And I go back to my days in a previous life. The last time that we had some significant issues was 2014. Mm-hmm. There was a whole contract negotiation. Contrary to some opinions, there was never a strike. There was never a lockout. What there was worker slowdowns. There were days when management would come in, they'd be pissed off, and they'd clear the terminal saying, that's it, everybody go home. You're not going to work to your full productivity, then go home, get off the terminal, done. So what we saw was vessels sitting out at anchor, right? But at its worst, it was around 17, 18.
Right.
Even today, you've got 20 plus sitting outside of Oakland. You've got around 18 sitting outside of LA Long Beach. You've got vessels at anchor in Vancouver and Seattle, Tacoma. I mean, it's not pretty right now, and everybody's operating under a contract.
Right.
So just looking back and seeing the things that I've seen, and now seeing some of the behaviors that I've seen with the ILA on the East Coast, this could be a perfect storm on top of just an awful storm that we've all been weathering.
Oh, geez. Wow. What do you do? What do you mean? What do you like? You'd sit there and want to say to like the ILA, to the management, all that stuff. Like, look at the cost, like the like 12,000 for a container, and like you guys are gonna start complaining about like this needs to get solved. Like, it needs to change. Like, is there anything? Is that something that could play a factor in this, or
no?
It's going to be they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, the pricing is really immaterial to any of the longshoreman unions, because that pricing that gets paid to the actual carriers, right? So, the carriers end up paying the terminals for terminal operations, and then the workers are compensated through that. But if I'm a shipper, I'm pulling in an inventory early, right, to get out in front of this. Because if you ship product in, let's say May, and then it creeps up on July, there's a good chance that your product could sit. Now, there are things that our own government can do to step in. They can come in, they can invoke the Taft-Hartley Act. They can sort of force everybody to get back to work. We haven't seen that in quite a while. But this could be very, very ugly. But what ends up happening is that there is a huge hit to the U.S. economy if this happens. So it very quickly gets everybody's attention. Yeah. So you could see some government intervention depending on how this goes. And hey, that's just me being the pessimist.
Right.
But I'm trying to be realistic and give everybody a realistic picture of what could happen. Hey, maybe everything gets ironed out, contracts get negotiated early, and it's smooth sailing from there. Fingers crossed.
But the most important thing to do is be proactive in your communication.
Yes.
It's the thing we preach day in and day out, paying attention to what's out there. And it's impossible. It's very, very hard to kind of be a shipper and kind of paying attention to all this stuff while you're still trying to move your product. You're trying to get your transportation program. So that's what makes us great. The whole managed transportation that we do. Chris, if people want to get in touch with you, if they want to have some shipper therapy and complain about how horrible everything is right now, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah. Shoot me a note, Peckham at FreightPlus.io. I'll always answer as many emails as I can. Happy to give out any advice, any strategies that I've learned, being here and from my previous lives. It's a difficult environment, but as Kyle mentioned, the best thing that you can do, socialize this internally, especially with your finance teams, work with your inventory and your sourcing teams. Again, if I was on that side of the desk, I would be pulling in shipments like crazy right now.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Well, that's all we have. So thanks for watching Consulting Logistics. See you later, Chris.
All right. Take care. Thanks, Kyle.
Bye.